Besitos Masi for being here this evening. You know, I'm Maria Hernandez. I am part of the Right to Democracy. I was just selected to be part of their Environment and Democracy Fellowship alongside Miss Andra Samoa from American Samoa. And on behalf of the Right to Democracy, we want to welcome you to tonight's panel on Islands Rising, Environment and Democracy in the Territories. This is a conversation rooted in the lived realities of those of us in the U.S. territories, where decisions are made far away and impact the lands and waters we depend on here at home. As we approach the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and mark 75 years since the passage of the Organic Act of Guam, a law that granted citizenship without full self-determination, we come together from the U.S. territories, places that are claimed but not fully heard, to ask, what does democracy mean if we cannot protect our land, water, and future? So before we begin and introduce our esteemed panel, we want to start with some introductions from leaders of Right to Democracy whose vision makes conversations like this possible. Right to Democracy is co-founded and co-directed by two individuals committed to justice in the territories, Neil Weare from Guam and Addie Martinez-Roman from Puerto Rico.
Thanks so much, Maria. So happy to be here this evening with all of you. Always excited to make it back home to Guam. And really I have a lot of favorite things when I come home. Getting empanada down at Oriental Market in Agate, that's one of them. But what I really love is being able to bring my friends and colleagues from other territories here to see our island, meet our people, and for us to have opportunities to learn from each other. They can share their experience about what life is like in their communities. They can learn about what's happening in ours. And so really excited to be able to have some folks from other territories here today. This is an important time in the history of Guam and each of the territories. Here in Guam, and I know there's been some events earlier in the year around the 75th anniversary of Guam's Organic Act. Looking ahead to next year, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, this founding document in U.S. history that itself was a rejection of colonial rule, an embrace of values of government by consent, all created equal, and juxtaposing that alongside this history in Guam with the Organic Act, which was a step forward in self-government in many ways, but really fell short of some of those ideals found in the Declaration of Independence. Next year also marks the 125th anniversary of the Insular Cases, which established this legal colonial framework for governing places like Guam and Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories. So a very important time to be having these conversations. We're excited to be here today and look forward to being in conversation with all of you as the evening goes on.
Buenas tardes. Hola. My name is Addie Martinez-Roman, and this is my third time in Guam since I started this fabulous work with Neil Weare here. And I just have to say, when I come here, I feel I'm coming to see family. And I didn't want to keep talking without recognizing that family that is here with us tonight. Members of our cross-territorial coalition are with us. Of course, Michael Bevacqua is here. We have Sarah Ninadog over there. He's part of our coalition. Professor Ken Cooper is over there. Thank you for coming. And last but not least, we have Mary Jo Kenga. She's over there. And these people have engaged with us since the first summit on U.S. colonialism in 2023 and became part of our cross-territorial coalition, dedicating time and effort to keep meeting with other members of the coalition that live in each of the territories, and we have become family. And part of this work started when we started having conversations with communities and listening to their concerns. And one of the biggest concerns that was expressed in all the territories was the environmental and climate challenges that we are all having, because we are all islands, archipelagos, and how that intersects with the issues of democracy that we all are facing. And as part of our efforts, we were able to get funds to do this fellowship that Maria alluded to, and that she's our fellow here in Guam, and that Andra is our fellow in American Samoa. And we have a fellow in Northern Mariana Islands, maybe you know her, Sheila Babauta. And we have also two fellows in the Virgin Islands. One of them is the cross-territorial fellow, and another one is Imani Daniel. She is the fellow. And then we have Naida Bobonis in Puerto Rico. And the purpose of this work is to be able to engage continually with each other in terms of what our challenges are, and for them to engage community organizations locally in this cross-territorial conversation, with the objective of building together an advocacy strategy and deciding together which would be the best way for us to visualize these intersections, either in a federal level or an international level, depending on the strategies that these bright ladies come up with. And that is the purpose of the Environment and Democracy Fellowship. And one of the first tasks that Maria had was to make this panel. It has been a great turnout and a great set of panelists. So we're really looking forward to the conversation today. And thank you so much for being here.
So before we introduce the panelists themselves, we want to go ahead and also recognize our wonderful moderators, Dr. Maria Bevacqua. And so everybody's going to kind of introduce themselves, how they kind of got into community work, decolonial work, and we'll go ahead and pop it off with you, Miguel.
Oh, no, c'est juste Marcin. Bonito it's always nice, especially in today's world when there's so many crazy things going on. It's good to be in conversation with good people who are worried about the same things that you are. And so, in talking about these issues, before we introduce, as we're getting our panelists to introduce themselves, and I know that some of them may be more familiar to you than others, I'd like each of you, por favor, to share your name, share the groups, share the place that you call home. And because we're talking about issues of colonization, democracy, and we're also talking about environment, right? And a lot of times people think of those as being separate issues, right? There's environmentalists, there's voting rights, there's democratic principles, and people don't think of them together. But in introducing yourself, can you talk about something that brought you into this work? Decolonial work, environmental work. Share a story, I think, because that's something that we need more and more nowadays. Something that inspired you to commit yourself to this work, which increasingly nowadays is harder and harder to do, and sometimes it's easy to feel like there's less hope in the world. And so, can you talk to us? Let's begin with Tutu Mahazima Samkumini. So let's start with who has traveled the farthest. Senora Samoa, Ungad.
Can we begin with you?
Talofa and Hafaday. So my name is Andra, that's English, and my last name is Samoa, that is Samoan. So you could say I'm a hybrid of English and Samoa. Raised in this village, out of 67 villages in American Samoa. My beginning of interested in policy issues was when my ancestors was very involved in doing things for others, and as natural leaders of my ancestors, who also were signers of the deed of cession back in 1900, and also from 1904 when the King of Manua decided to also cede to the United States. So my childhood began to be formed and always interested in public policy issues, how the chiefs will make decisions that will benefit the family, and also with regards to elevating up to the government. So my whole life of 40 years of public service originated from that seed that was planted by my ancestors to also deal with the environment. We have a mangroves, we have a rainforest, streams, and we have a beautiful ocean that sustained us in the village. And it grew to where I would study political science at the University of Washington, and also worked for 10 years in Washington, D.C. As I know, the policy that originates there is from people that will sit behind the desk and determine how these policies can meet the needs of the territories. And that's where I worked for 11 years and decided to move back home to, of course, all of you know that caring for your elderly parents is a focus of getting blessings and also to give back to the community. I ended up returning home and worked for the American Samoa Power Authority for 16 years. Out of that 16, 7 of those years I was the chief executive officer, knowing about water, power, wastewater, solid waste, and at one time being a fuel supplier. So after that, politics made its way to get me to be terminated, and I ended up back in the grassroots of a village and also getting into the legislature for 4 years. So after that 4 years, I am now a public policy advisor for the governor, that is Honorable Pula, and the lieutenant governor. And that is where my experience of being out in the grassroots, of caring for the environment and creating a nursery for the protection of corals and the protection of the stream and protection of the rainforest, and also with the ocean. So, and I was referred to the Right to Democracy by a lawyer with regards to, he has been seeing the work that I do out in the villages and also in dealing with legislation to change the behavior of people to at least making change for the quality of life for American Samoa. Thank you.
Andra, thank you so much for being here in Guam. We do have a little gift for you.
Andra's gonna give the gift to
Andra's gonna
Miguel.
give. Okay, first to Miguel. And then we have a way for all.
So this is a little gift from Right to Democracy, but Andra, come here because you're gonna put this from American Samoa. Can I just she is going to.
Thank you. As my cousin Simon Sanchez knows, this is a very honor symbol of our culture. As you know, these are pandanus, and we do have mats, and one of our most honorable money, it's not money, but it's called fine mats. And fine mats we use for the exchange and the reciprocation of gifts to any of the people that have made a difference. And this I present as thank you for all your work And as the chiefs only wear this, but he is a chief because of the work that he does for the museum and also for the arts and preserving our culture. Thank you.
Oh. Oh, thank you. Oh. Hey. Oh, wow. Hey, Sidus Mossing. Man, I didn't expect this. So this is very nice. Oh, yes, Sidus Mossing. Thank you so much. And you know, I always forget every time, Sedlu Adi, every time you come to Guam, I always feel that I feel you're like one of my cruise cousins or something like that. So I always forget how far you have come. And so I want to ask you now to please introduce yourself and tell us about what brought you into this work.
Thank you. I'm going to be fast because you already introduced myself a little bit. But what brought me to this work, is many things. It's a lifetime of working with communities, low-income communities in Puerto Rico. I am a community lawyer. After doing my BA in the States, I came back home because I really wanted to help my people have agency in the decision-making process of things that affect them, and that's why I studied law. And I was able to be a community lawyer and also be dean of students in the University of Puerto Rico Law School for a while, directed the pro bono program, was president of Puerto Rico Legal Service Corporation, and then was recruited to direct an Access to Justice Fund Foundation in 2017. And when I started this position, I was just, normal until Hurricane Maria and Irma hit Puerto Rico. And that really changed our lives. And if you don't know, it was 2 Category 5 hurricanes that plummeted the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And more than 4,000 people died after because of the failed recovery process. And after 2 years of trying to bring and being able to bring funds for civil legal aid, emergency civil legal aid, because even that is needed, Oxfam America recruited me to go to Washington to advocate for a better recovery for Puerto Rico. And I think that is, I, as many of you know, have grown to really believe in Puerto Rico Libre. Like that's my personal ideal. But it was not until I was in Congress that I was able to understand how little they knew about us. Like how little these Congress people, how little the executive knew, and also how little they cared. And that was that was strong for me, even though I already knew it because I had already been, looking at these things. When you say, cuando estás en la boca del lobo, when you're in the mouth of the wolf, right? It's another thing. And so that, I think, Miguel, what really inspired me to come back to Puerto Rico. I founded 2 organizations to work with community leaders and with nonprofits to try to empower them and have them have more agency in the work back home. And then Neil called me on December of 2022, and we got to talking, and he convinced me about the importance of working with all the territories and not only with Puerto Rico. And let me tell you that now I'm completely convinced, as you will see when we talk more, that this is the path. So that's why.
Sidus Masi. And now let us hear from I always like to hear from. It's always great when I used to get to sit, particularly on this stage with Dr. Underwood, Itiuhu. And so let us hear now from Dr. Underwood, Congressman Underwood, who needs little introduction here. But if there's a particular moment that he wants to share in terms of what brought him into the work that we know, know him for.
Buenas noches, Afade Todos Amigos. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for inviting me on this panel. Of course, I know almost everyone in the audience at one time or another. I'm trying to think who I don't know. But at some point, in the course of my life, of course, I've done many different things, but my current role is very important. I think I'm chairman of the Pacific Center for Island Security, and we're very much involved in trying to deconstruct and analyze the current intensity of the militarization of the island. And moreover, what is it that we can do to alter its course, or what we can do to ameliorate, stop, whatever it is that you want to do. And so that brings to mind a number of different issues. They are political in nature. They're also talking about development. They're also talking about challenges to the environment. And so just a couple of things that have come to mind. One, I was involved as a kind of expert witness in an arbitration case over the Ordot landfill. And in that, they amassed on one side all the Navy team, the Department of Defense team, and then on this side there was the Guam team and Guam attorneys, and then I was kind of invited in, and the judge. It was kind of a formal setting. And one of the things that really fascinated me about that was the use of policy and the intersection with environmental policy in that. Now, the dump in Underwood started off as a military dump. And there were lots of people testifying that they, it was a Marine Corps dump, Marine Corps depot. They would just drive trucks in there and whatever, and then dump them, bury them. And then it became this depot, and then it was turned over. The government of Guam didn't exactly acquit itself either. They dumped a lot of crap in there as well. So over time, it became a case of trying to figure out who was more responsible for this, who was the originator, who was the degradation, how did this begin, what was our attitude about all of this. And there's a program called Formerly Used Defense Sites. And that's a congressional law that says you can identify formerly used defense sites in order to ameliorate them, and they list them, and there's like 90 of them in Guam. At one time, when I was in office, there was at least 90. And then you could argue, well, if there's degradation there, who's responsible, all that. In trying to analyze the origin of the Underwood dump, it used to be a Marine Corps depot, but then when they redrew the line of the FUDs, all of a sudden the dump was no longer part of it. And so all of a sudden it was like conveniently forgotten that this was a formerly used defense site. And so the redrawing of that boundary, obviously it was somebody that did it deliberately. So it just sort of reminded me that one, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of analysis to be done. There's a lot of monitoring to be done, and always have to be on your toes. Then, of course, the most recent thing is the construction of Camp Blas. And what, just looked to me on the outside, it looked like that whole part of the island was just literally disfigured and raped. And it happened overnight. And it was just so startling. And I kept thinking, there must be something wrong about this. And not only that, there must be something we can do about it. And lo and behold, I guess not. And so that's why we're here.
We also want to recognize Professor Underwood. There's also some Puerto Rican candy here.
always happy to be matching with Robert Underwood. Iba. Okay. And so, what's that? Okay. And then I'm going to pass it over to the other side over there. Hungan, Imagasu. Melvin Guam Pat-Borja, who is definitely UN jet lagged. And so, Melvin Hungan Sedluhu, tell us what brings you into this, what brought you into this work?
My name is Melvin Guam Pat-Borja. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization. I also serve as President of the Department of Samoa Affairs. I don't really know how I got here. I'm an educator by trade. I worked for a long time in the public school system and in nonprofit education. I guess I could blame my parents. My parents are the crazy people that are friends with folks like Dr. Underwood and Sinalo, a lot of the Sino that I see in the room that have really helped to educate me and prepare me for this work. But I spent a long time in the activist realm doing work around raising awareness about Guam's militarization and our colonial status. I was a volunteer for a while with the Independence Task Force, which is one of the components of the Commission on Decolonization. And so when the administration changed and all the directors changed with it, there was an opening for the Commission on Decolonization director position, and I threw my hat in the mix, and I was kind of surprised when they hired me, to be honest with you. But here I am, and we're doing the thing. So we've been really focused primarily on education, which is the lone active part of our mandate. I just want to take a moment to invite all of you to please take some of our educational materials, which are out in the lobby. Right when you exit the theater, you'll see it before you leave the lobby. Our primary focus really is on education in regards to environment. I grew up at the Guam EPA. My dad used to be an employee at Guam EPA, so my siblings and I that was kind of our after-school hangout. So EPA, I think, in the environment has always been something that's very important to my family. We were the kids that used to write down the people's license plate when they throw trash out the window. And I was convinced that my dad was really ticketing them, but I don't think he was. But yeah, obviously the environment is a very critical component of our decolonization. But it's the double-edged sword, right? How do we truly and impactfully protect our environment if we are not fully self-governing and are not empowered to make decisions that ultimately change the nature of our relationship with the United States government, in particular the Department of Defense. As a territory of the United States, our relationship with Department of Defense, or Department of War now, is one that's based on consultation and not consent. And so the only real legal obligation that DOD or DOW has now to conduct military activities, which may or may not have adverse impact into our environment, is to inform us of what they're doing. And any of you who have been involved in this work know that when they give you the information, the announcement, hey, this is what we're going to do, we come out in force and we participate in the process wholeheartedly, only to realize that our comments are really just being duly noted. And so, there really is no legitimate opportunity for us to engage meaningfully with the federal government in regard to the use of our land, water, and airspace.
We also want to recognize Melvin for all of his work on decolonization and the environment.
Right. And now for the last introduction, I want to hand it off to Maria here, who's gathered us all together. And so if you want to introduce and share.
Sitos Maasi. Thank you everybody once again for being here. I put this panel together. I am a co-director of Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, as well as a 2025 Rights of Democracy, Environment and Democracy Fellow. And I was just gonna be that person that put the panel together, but there was just shout out to the RTD Coalition, just wanting to uplift, the story of a Chamorro family that has been fighting for land return for more than 60 years, and just really love the community that Rights of Democracy has built, and so I got into this work. It was maybe around 2014 when the firing range complex up at Latexan and Tailalo was proposed. So the Retidian families came together, we attended the environmental impact statements. I was a reporter at the PDN at the time, and I couldn't really be as vocal as I wanted because, that was the purpose of being a reporter. You have to be objective. But I remember going to an SCIS hearing and talking to some of the activists there, and I was telling them, I'm at the PDN, they're like, quit your job. You gotta be vocal. And I was doing what I could in the newsroom, talking to the managing editor at the time, have you seen this? Have you seen these impacts? This is what is gonna happen to our island. I had the sort of the privilege of, in my generation of my family, to not move off island. I'm really the one in our generation who stayed here, so I was able to attend all the Retidian family meetings with the congresswoman at the time, with the governor at the time, and so I really carry those stories of that my elders who, I remember the fists being pounded on the tables. I remember the tears that were shed throughout those years of advocacy for a lot of my Menyaina who had passed on to the next life, and I carry that energy with me. I want to shout out my prima Casey Bajado in the audience, also a fighter for our lands. Her dad, Chris Bajado, before he passed away, was our family spokesperson, so he was the one really fighting for land return, and it was after he had passed away that I had worked in media and I was comfortable speaking to media, and it naturally got into this place of then leaving the PDN and getting more vocal. And so in everything that our generation does, we remember those who have fought for the return of our lands for their entire lives until the day that they died. Our great-grandfather, even on his obituary, it says Retidian original landowner. And so we're fighting against this massive 700-acre firing range complex in northern Guam. And, the 4 out of the 5 ranges have been built. The marine base seeing all the destruction of entire ancient settlements. These are entire settlements that are being cleared up in northern Guam. You see the impacts of the missile defense system, the contamination of our waters. I've spent the last few years looking into contamination of our waters here in Guam, the Marianas, Hawaii. And after all this time, really coming to this understanding that everything, all the arrows point back to our political status. That is why we don't have consent. We don't have consent to say no to projects that impact our lands and waters. So that's what brings me here today, and I'm happy to be part of this panel. Sitos Masi.
Thank you all for sharing and for introducing yourselves. And so I want to kind of put this out there and hear each of your responses. Next year, there'll be a big birthday celebration in the United States. 250 years for the United States, and some might say it's showing its age. Now, over the years, over the history of the United States, some people have asked the question, what does it mean to celebrate America from the perspective of a slave, a Native American, a person from the territories? What does it mean? And so I want to ask you, as we get ready for the 250th anniversary of the birth of the United States, what does it mean to come from your particular corner of the American empire? What does it mean to you? What is your, and feel free to take this however you would want. What would your message be to America? What do you feel it means in terms of the environment? Because many of the cultures that we're talking about are much older than the United States. And so 250 years is quite young compared to a lot of the cultures that the United States has colonized. And so, what are your reflections coming from the territories of the United States on the eve of the 250th birthday? And so, I'm looking, who's ready? Abby looks ready. Oh no, oh my goodness, okay. No. No, I'm kidding. No, Underwood looks ready.
He's been ready.
He's always ready. He's familiar in cuento, but he should be familiar in listu. Okay. Listu para cuentos.
Well, thank you for that question. This is a question that surfaces every 4th of July, because you have to kind of like reconcile yourself. What are you celebrating and how do you fit into the picture? And of course, as an historical document, there's always one thing that I try to refer students to, and that is to Frederick Douglass, who was an escaped slave, who wrote about what does the 4th of July mean to him. And that's so powerful, because it personalized it. It also meant, like, what really is there? Is there a promise there? Is there an implied promise, an unfulfilled promise? Of course, the American nation was founded on some very stirring principles, and the whole notion is very liberating. Every human being is, has inalienable rights, and nobody can take these rights away. Governments are only obligated to recognize these rights, but of course they were alienable, and they continue to be alienable. And depending on your situation, you get to enjoy some of them, you get to enjoy others, some you never enjoy. So that unfulfilled promise is always there. But that's kind of like an intellectual level. And everyone can relate to that in some fashion, because it raises questions about politics, raises questions about fairness. Always, when I went to the United Nations, gosh, almost 40 years ago now, one of the things that I stated was that, and I really believed it at the time, I said, we come here and we make a critical statement, but I want to believe in the American sense of fair play. I want to believe that there is an American sense of fair play. That there's this spirit obtains inside the American heart. I just feel like that's not really true anymore. I don't know. I mean, I hope that I'm wrong, but I just feel that that's not there. Instead, I see a heart that beats for vengeance, a heart that beats for retribution, a heart that looks backwards, not a heart that looks forward, not a heart that looks towards fulfillment, but a heart that divides and says some people are better than others. That's not American sense of fair play. And the other item that I hope, and we need to guard against this very seriously, is that the 200th anniversary was we go back 1976. Now, some of you were involved in the commemoration of the 200th anniversary of the American Republic. And that sparked one of the things which I sort of became well known in kind of intellectual circles was I took my good friend Dr. Samoa and another friend, and we went down and we drove around the island, and we went to the monument down there in front of the church, San Dimas, and it's the Tazututihan monument. Only monument in the whole island that was written entirely in Chamorro. And it's about commemorating the lives of those people of Modesto who were massacred during World War II. And you know what they did for the bicentennial? They painted it red, white, and blue. And I thought, wow, that's so disappointing, so heartless, so unmindful of what these people went through. They didn't get killed because of the red, white, and blue. They got killed because of the circumstances that they're in. And the Chamorro people of Modesto at the time saw fit to try to memorialize that in their own way. And then it was co-opted. So I wrote a little article on it. And, you know, it's red, white, wash, and blue. That's the name of the article. Now, I'd like to believe that I could take credit for the titling of that article, but, you know, in those days, the editors make the decision about what to title. That's not to give credit to a man and nobody knows anymore. Dan Gibson, who was working for the PDN, he said, hey, Robert, we should put red, white, wash, and blue. But that could happen again. And someone's going to try to make that happen again. So that when you're celebrating your 250th anniversary of American independence and what it means to you, don't let it be co-opted. Be true. Be authentic. Talk about who you are, your experiences as a people, and your experiences as an island.
Who would, Senora Samoa, Addie, do you have some thoughts? Or Melvin?
I will take the second turn. Because I just wanted to say, you know, I identify and feel everything that Professor Underwood is saying. And especially when, you know, I was brought up in a household that really taught me to understand our history in Puerto Rico, and I always understood that how the relationship that we had with the U.S. was colonial. But I think that this conundrum about the values that are represented in the United States Declaration of Independence, I try to avoid say American, because for me America is the whole continent of America. And so you will hear me say weird things like United Statians instead of Americans, but that's just me. So this birthday of the United States brings a conundrum because it has very important values like consent of the governed, and also everybody is created equal. And I remember after trying to search for answers on how to understand the relationship between law and social change, I went to do my doctorate in Spain, and we were talking about fundamental rights. And the value of human rights, fundamental rights that are now recognized internationally and protect us all, or we use them as tools and institutions to protect us all, include very, very importantly, consent of the governed as the primary value in all of these declarations and the creation of the institution of a fundamental right. And also, everybody's created equal. But at the same time, a value has so much context, and depending on the time in history it is created. And so, of course, we have to go back and say when this happened 250 years ago, consent of the governed only mean consent of and everybody created equal, they were only talking about the white men that were property owners. But this has evolved. And it has evolved not because of that moment in time, but because of all of society and civil society taking those values and making it theirs, and creating new institutions to protect their rights and generalize those values to other people and to other nations. And so those values are so important because they become the inspiration, they become the content, the substantive content of trying to amplify the meaning that they were in the beginning. So for Puerto Rico, it's not only the 250th anniversary of the U.S. independence, it's also the almost 75 years, it's 74 years of our Constitution, when we were allowed to do a Constitution by the U.S. in 1952. And the Constitution of Puerto Rico was seen as a very advanced document because it gathered all these new ideas of civil and fundamental rights that were being talked about internationally. When it was sent to the U.S. Congress after the people of Puerto Rico had approved it, it was edited. And a whole section of it was eliminated. And it was the section of socioeconomic rights, which kind of respond to the idea of everybody's created equal, because it's the value of equality that requires socioeconomic rights. So that's another moment in history, another context. And then it's also the 10th anniversary of another moment in time, very important in Puerto Rico, is the approval of the Promesa Law. And it's funny because this question is about the promise, and promesa means promise in Spanish. And the Promesa Law was a law created by the U.S. Congress because Puerto Rico went bankrupt in 2016. We tried to create our own law for bankruptcy because us, nor any territory, can participate in the bankruptcy code. We don't have that as a venue of our utilities or our agencies or our government to becoming bankrupt. So Congress, instead of doing something so we could participate in the bankruptcy code, created this whole thing, which is the Promesa Law, that gives the power to the President of the U.S. to name 9 persons, 9 people, to basically rule over Puerto Rico, because they are the ones that can approve our budget and they can overturn any law that goes against the economic situation or affects the economic situations, because they are the ones in charge of representing Puerto Rico in this negotiation of bankruptcy with the bondholders before the courts. So people that are selected by the President of the United States, who are basically, who is somebody that doesn't represent us or that we don't elect, and a Congress that we don't have any voting participation on, created this mechanism that control our lives today completely. And it was a moment, like an aha moment for Puerto Rico, because before Promesa and before the disaster that happened, as you see, 2016, 2017, Hurricane Maria and Irma passed. So right now for Puerto Rico, it is very common for people to say the colonial board. The word colony started coming out more naturally. Even for those that believed in the Commonwealth as a creature, we also, in 2016, received a decision from the Supreme Court to say your Constitution that created the Commonwealth, El Estado Libre Asociado, the free associated state in Spanish, is really a creature from Congress. is a gift that Congress gives to you to be able to do this Constitution, but it really doesn't mean that you guys have any type of sovereignty. You're still an unincorporated territory under plenary power of Congress. So to this day, that's the meaning that we have. These values is something that we have strived for, we have fought for, but in reality, they don't exist or materialize in Puerto Rico.
Melvin or Senora Samoa, did you want to? Here.
Thank you. American Samoa's culture and land and arts, the language is still real today as when it was discovered back in 1722 by a Dutch explorer. And the wisdom of our ancestors back in 1900, about 11 of the chiefs signed the deed of cession, was definitely voluntary with due diligence of wisdom. And the first and foremost of their wisdom was the protection of land. With land comes title, chief. The chiefs are the protector of our language and the land and the ocean. So the deed of cession, signed in April 1900, is still real today to us in terms of the wisdom. Our communal land system, our language has been intact for thousands of years. But with regards to what Honorable Underwood said, there has been unfulfilled promises with a current situation in terms of we throw these words, mutual consent. Is it mutual consent? We did not even provide to have our United States allow this whole notion of deep sea mining that is going to scrape the nodules from under the ocean, and we will be affected. We have against, in terms of petition, with the help of all of the territories that came to help out with the coordination from the Right to Democracy to at least help us with regards to this issue of deep sea mining. And it's beginning to awaken a reckoning of our questioning the United States. Is this how Right to Democracy, or that name before Samoa that is called American? Are we really American when we cannot vote or have a say or a consent? No, we don't feel this way right now as we see the stick and carrot and the terms and conditions. We love the federal grants, but is it really the bundle of contradiction that comes with these federal grants that say, follow our rules or you will be non-compliance to our federal funds? And is it really they're following their rules because they provide us with federal regulations called Coastal Zone Management Program, federal consistency in following the environmental protection agencies in protecting our ocean and land? And yet, is it the one-way street that they have provided, allowing other companies to conduct due diligence to get the nodules that are under the ocean, which is going to have an adverse impact to our industry on fish and also with the ocean and marine wildlife. So that is, we're beginning to see a trend of questioning the unfulfilled promises that they have signed together with our ancestors in the deed of cession to protect our land and ocean. So that's something that can happen to any of the U.S. territories, and that's where we're beginning to, have a change of questioning the colonizer in terms of us being a U.S. territory. So that's something that I am so honored to be able to join with the other territories, because it could happen to any of the territories with what the government is doing to the deep sea mining. Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's Mel's turn, but I just need to add to that, because this is a really dramatic issue, because it adds to the understanding of protecting your land and protecting your resources to the issue of law and rights. And so she has put it beautifully in terms of mutual consent. It's not just, the question becomes not just, are we interested in having a mutual relationship, but is the U.S. government itself committing to obeying its own laws, its own rules, so that it avoids its own laws and its rules whenever it's convenient. And so these things get shunted away. These things, environmental impact statements. The Department of the Navy earlier this year excused itself from all unexploded ordnance requirements on any military construction project in the Pacific outside of the state of Hawaii. And it did so arbitrarily. Nobody asked, nobody presented, and so the capacity to do this, it not only defeats the nature of mutuality, it just defeats the nature of having like any kind of normal government relationship when the federal government itself won't obey its own laws and rules and will exempt itself. And of course now with the deep seabed mining issue, as I understand it, both the Governor Pula, and Delegate Radewagen are both dead set against deep seabed mining. But Donald Trump has encouraged companies to start working on deep seabed mining in those very waters in which these two public officials are responsible for. Very sad.
You can take my turn anytime, Simon. I think in regard to the America 250, I think it's a pretty loaded question. Full disclosure, I'm part of the committee for America 250 for Guam. I didn't ask for that either, but here we are. I think for me, I get caught up a lot in the irony of the celebration. I mean, rightfully so. I think that it's an exciting thing for Americans without the asterisks after it, and it doesn't apply to citizens, U.S. citizens that live in the territories. I think that that's also part of the irony, is that, we have seemingly all of the rights and protections and, obligations, benefits of being U.S. citizens. But, that really is only true if you're willing to give up your homeland and live in the continental United States as a registered voter. Because then you're a bona fide U.S. citizen with meaningful representation in the system of democracy that is recognized. We celebrate, we also celebrated recently the anniversary of the Organic Act of Guam, which I think is should be a very proud and defining moment for our people. Because the Organic Act of Guam is kind of widely acknowledged on Guam as the moment when we became U.S. citizens. But for me, I think the bigger, more important piece is it is the acknowledgement that we were not just ready and willing, but we were capable of being self-governing, right? Because the Organic Act of Guam also allowed us the opportunity to develop our local government. And so, when I look at the Organic Act of Guam and all of the, all of our elders that were the movers and shakers of that time, I can't help but feel like we never had this idea that this was the end. That Organic Act of Guam, that unincorporated territory was somehow good enough. I don't think in any universe our sign had thought that that was enough. I don't think that I don't think that this is a dignified place that we're in, so many years after the signing of the Organic Act. And so, when I think about America 250, I can't help but get caught up in the ironies and the hypocrisies that are inextricably attached to this celebration. Part of the America 250 platform is to reach out to all these high school students. They're going to write an essay to participate in this thing they call America's Field Trip. And so, also ironically, I think one of our kids ranked up in there because we can write. But, when I looked at the list of the field trip, right, where they're going to go, visit the Alamo. And I can't help but wonder, where are... I understand in principle, the creation of the American system of democracy, this undeniable assertion that they're not going to live as colonial subjects. I can acknowledge that that is a beautiful thing. But you can't acknowledge that without also acknowledging where are Native Americans in this conversation? Where are Native Hawaiians in the conversation? How come America's field trip is not going to go to the Iolani Palace? What about all the places in the continental U.S. that have been drastically affected by this kind of uprooting of their system of governance? As a sovereign people prior to the arrival of American colonizers. And so, I agree. I think that a lot of, there has to be the question about, what are these unfulfilled promises? But at the same time, I think we also have to recognize that, unincorporated territory is kind of this unique status that I believe was built for us, specifically for us, purposely for us. It allows the advantageous inequity that benefits the colonizer at our expense. When I think of, you think about what is the difference between an incorporated and an unincorporated territory? And I know there's not a lot of examples of incorporated territories, at least not that are very well known by a lot of people, but to be an incorporated territory, essentially, and I'm really simplifying this, but essentially, we're talking about being on a direct path to statehood, right? There's a plan for you. You're an incorporated territory for now, right? This is just temporary. We're working on some things. We're doing some things. I always get caught up in that one too. I feel like America's always working on some things and doing some things, and we're just supposed to patiently wait as we watch all of our ancestors pass, and still, find ourselves in this extremely inequitable situation. So, when I think about unincorporated territory, you really do the homework on it. There is no place for equity in a relationship like this, because there are other policy-based mechanisms that are built to reinforce that inequity, right? Like the territorial clause or plenary power. Congress has plenary power over all territories. And so we have to ask ourselves, as much as we want to celebrate the creation of a local government through the Organic Act, what kind of local government are we talking about? And what does a local government mean if it lacks sovereignty? Even if those of you that recall the Commonwealth Draft Act era for Guam, I feel kind of cheated that I was not, old enough to be in the cut on the Commonwealth Draft Act era. But when I look back at that history, one of the things that really stands out to me was that there was this it's like a galvanizing moment for our people. Even in the government, you go back to that era, you go look at any government of Guam letterhead, every single one of them says Commonwealth now. You guys remember that? I only got to experience this vicariously through the archive. But it was a super exciting moment for me. Because I always wondered, I even asked the governor, I was like, God, can we get decolonized now on all our letterheads? I mean, I feel like that's an appropriate evolution of our struggle, you know? But look at the Commonwealth Draft Act. Look at what we did and how much we invested in it, how much we believed in it, and how seriously we took ourselves in that moment. Go read the Commonwealth Draft Act that we presented to Congress. You know, I personally, on a personal note, I cannot stand what I believe is unfair criticism of our government at that time. I hear a lot of naysayers say, Guam could have passed the Commonwealth Draft Act, but, government of Guam was just unwilling to negotiate. Let's be clear that was never a negotiation. And let's also be clear that this all happened in the committee, not in the halls of Congress, not on the floor, where we could also argue that we're clearly at a disadvantage with, no disrespect to any of our delegates, like Congressman Underwood and my mom's father, you know what I mean? But where are we in the halls of Congress where we don't have meaningful representation? How do you even call that a negotiation? And if you look back at that history, they'll say, the naysayers say, Guam didn't want to negotiate on some of the articles that the Congress didn't agree with. And the primary ones were the article on immigration and the article on mutual consent. And the crazy thing was I remember watching and reading the transcript of Governor Adam saying that it is not within his authority to remove the article on immigration and the article on mutual consent because this is the will of my people. It was voted on in referendum. We didn't send him there to negotiate. We sent him there to present as we wrote it, as we adopted it, as we approved it. And so, when I think about all of these things that we have done over the years, I mean, it's heartbreaking, no doubt about it. But it's also exciting to think that, no matter the struggle, no matter the challenge, no matter the unbeatable hurdle, we have always risen to the occasion and we have always believed that we are deserving of these basic things like self-government. We've always believed that we are capable of governing ourselves and that we want to govern ourselves. And we'll figure out how to do it, you know what I mean? Whether that's going to be through statehood, free association, independence, but this unincorporated territory status should be unacceptable to all of us. So it's hard. It's hard to celebrate.
Viva.
250.
C'est juste mon sake. Maria?
I think what I will share about just growing up, born and raised here in Guam, I didn't even learn that we were a colony until college. In political science class with Dr. Mary Cruz, I didn't know that we were referred to as alien races until college, and I just want to shout out UOG Press for a lot of the work that they've been doing to get textbooks written with this colonial reality in them that are in schools right now. And I envision a future in 15, 20 years where our nannies are aware of this reality. And in the Declaration of Independence, it speaks on consent of the governed. And that is not something that we have had. It's living in life in a colony is our water being contaminated. Life in a colony is entire ancient settlements being cleared against our will. It's our governor, our highest ranking official, our Magahaga, can't even pause construction around a mother tree. our highest ranking official. And so this is the reality of status quo. And speaking, as somebody who has been doing, just advocacy around, environment and culture over the years, alongside so many other passionate people in the community, we've worked so hard over the years to pass legislation, to pass resolutions calling for pause to projects that harm our water, harm our lands. And they've passed. We worked so hard, they passed, we celebrate, we're excited, but these are non-binding. And so this is life in a colony. And I know, in some territories it's still tough for a lot of people to say we're a colony. But I think we all need to just start getting used to saying we are a colony. This is life on a colony, and not become desensitized to the violence, because this is violence to our lands, violence to our waters. And we need to create a future that is worthy of our nennies. And I think that's why a lot of activists in the movement are mothers. We want to just create a future for our children where they can thrive.
See the response. Now, I did have more questions, but I actually want to open it up for questions from the audience now, because everyone already touched on all the topics that I had to ask about. So, biba hamzu told us, men halon hamzu, men malati hamzu. And so, who has a question? I'll go.
No, bring up the mic to us.
Oh, okay. Okay. Neil will go around with Senor Simon Hungan.
Dispensa, so I am dual colonized. My mother's from American Samoa. That is my cousin. My grandfather and her grandmother are siblings. And I am also a Filipino Chamorro from Tamuni. My father was Dr. Pedro Sanchez, the first native-born historian who wrote the first history of Guam, written by a native-born historian, right? And so somehow those two colonized people met and decided to get married, and I was one of 7 byproducts that I was born and raised here. But I've had a strong historic relationship with my Samoan side, as well as my Chamorro side, and I used to have Melvin's job. And I was the last executive director of the Political Status Commission at the time. I wrote that speech for Joetta that you were referring to, and we conducted the last plebiscites on Guam because of Dr. Souder and Dr. Underwood's insistence that the issue of colonization needed to become an issue for our community to begin to talk about. So we did have the elections, and we did pass the Commonwealth Act, and actually the 2 most compelling objections that were raised in the Congress from my recollection were mutual consent, right, and the right in sometime in the future to allow the indigenous vote, indigenous citizen vote only. And I was very close to then Congressman, Delegate Underwood's predecessor, Ben Bloss, retired Marine Corps general, right? And he was a little nervous about especially the indigenous right vote. In fact, that indigenous right vote is, to me, in my opinion, has paralyzed us on Guam, because we were trying to resolve, well, who can vote? And there was a strong view that, hey, the indigenous people of Guam have never been asked, right? And you can make arguments that, we did send people after World War II to Congress, local people. There wasn't a vote. But clearly no one's told Mr. Leon Burrell or Mr. Wanpat and those great leaders to say, hey, don't go to Washington, don't get citizenship. But it was the beginning of recognizing that, just being territory, right? And notice in the Constitution, they don't call it the colonial clause. They call it the territorial clause. That's why we're called territory, because colonies have, even America doesn't like that word, colonies, but they were using it to their advantage, right? But this whole issue of self-determination and mutual consent and the right, yes, we have local governance powers, but our abilities are restricted, right? We don't participate in the national governance that affects our lives daily. And then I had the opportunity to cheat a little bit this afternoon because I sat with Neil and with our dear friend from Puerto Rico, and what emerged for me, and in particular with Sina Robert, who's been there, right? I started to think about maybe the issue is, or maybe an approach is to get our territories, our colonies together, and the representatives in Congress, and to introduce federal legislation that allows for mutual consent by the territories when national policy is passed and affects us. Because in the Commonwealth Act, our version of it said, well, if you pass something in Washington that we don't like, we get to say no. You know, and in any relationship, you know, the idea is, you know, okay, I mean, Guam's not that different. Okay, my wife's the boss. But for theoretical purposes, in any relationship, the idea of mutual consent is primary. You know, we have a relationship, and
would anyone like to?
And so, so one tactic I'm suggesting to think about that emerged from my discussions with Neil earlier, and just being involved with this process for 38 years, waiting for a vote on something, is this idea of bring a tactic where the territories go into Washington and say, look, we want to talk about mutual consent in the governance of our colonies with relationship. If you're not going to let us full participation, because that's only through a state, if you're not going to let us in and you're going to keep us in this twilight zone of territorial colonial status, then we got to talk about mutual consent, because sometimes you do things in Washington that we object to, mineral rights in Samoa, right, and other things, that you do things in Washington that we object to, and we have no power to object to them, and you hold all the cards, and that is not an equal political relationship. So I throw out that perspective, that history, that's why I'm here, and I thank Dr. Souter, Dr. Underwood for beginning the conversation, at least in our community. And here we are some 40, 50 years later, still fighting the fight. But what about an idea where our congressional delegates introduce legislation that brings mutual consent to all the territories, and some mechanism of mutual consent? What do you think about that idea?
Well, in the imagined world, it's a great idea. But then we live in a real world. We can't even get our local leaders to agree here on the island. How do you imagine that all of this is going to come to pass amongst territorial delegates and governors and legislatures? The issue, I know that you've presented a compelling case, Simon, that trying to draw our attention to mutual consent as the major stumbling block. And so if you could get the other party to agree to mutual consent, then you have a deal. Well, they're not going to agree to mutual consent because that delimits their power. So the reality is that there are many legal and kind of political issues attached to that. One is that one Congress cannot obligate a future Congress. So even if you passed it for this Congress, a future Congress could just throw it out. So there's all of these things that are working. When delegates get together, and the resident commissioner, I remember one time we had a meeting, and including the delegate from the District of Columbia, and we asked, should we work together? And I looked around the room and I said, 5 times 0 is still 0. That's the political reality that you're in. And then there's the historical political reality, and I've told this before, is that there was, inside the federal government, there are people who are looked upon as having special expertise. Special expertise in the Department of Defense for a long time on Guam land issues with a man named Marcus. And every time any kind of legislation or any kind of initiative came up, didn't matter where it came from, it all went to his desk, and whatever he said is what the administration said. And it's the same thing for any kind of issues related to citizenship, the idea of mutuality, the idea of mutual consent, and the idea that somehow territories can become different, not subservient, sort of create a different status. That guy was named Walter Derringer, or I think, yeah. Now he was the guy working in DOJ for that. So after all these years, every time I ask somebody something, they say, well, we had to go to him. So one time I decided, well, I'll email him. Now this was about 6 or 7 years ago. And I emailed him. I said, what was going on all this time? And then he emailed me back and he said, well, I sort of vaguely remember Guam coming up in a conversation once or twice. And then I emailed him again 3 years later, and then he said, you know, I don't remember anything about Guam. And then he died. He was widely celebrated. I was watching it on CNN, celebrated as this great constitutional attorney. So that's the reality we're in. And so, you know, I don't want to be dispiriting, because I do believe that one of the things that I learned in going, I went to a conference by Native Hawaiians, first Native Hawaiian conference outside of Hawaii. They had it in Seattle. One of the things that I found very intriguing was the notion that you have to act like you have sovereignty. Stop behaving like you don't have it. Start acting like you have it. Act like it in your daily life. Act like it in your agriculture. Act like it in your personal pursuits. You act like you have sovereignty. And that after a while, leaders will catch on to it. Because I have to say that almost none of our leaders act like we have any sovereignty or any potential for sovereignty. None of them. None. So, in this situation, how do you get motivated? How do you motivate the leaders to act that way? So it's a complicated question. I'll leave it to historians to decide whether it didn't matter, all these arguments about immigration and Chamorro self-determination and mutual consent. At the end of the day, Congress was not going to give Guam anything because they were afraid they'd have to give it to Puerto Rico. And if they gave it to Puerto Rico, then the Commonwealthers will win because they'll have enhanced Commonwealth, and the statehooders would lose, and the Republican Party was wedded to statehood for Puerto Rico. And so, you know, at the end of the day, that was the 800-pound gorilla. Political status.
So the reason I came up with it is that old saying is all politics is local. And as we politicians know, I too have been elected and then asked also not to serve anymore, and then being re-elected. But it's the old, which way is the crowd going? And then you run in front of them, right? But right now, we've got a fairly passive community in almost all the territories that say, it ain't perfect, this relationship, but I'm not sure what viable alternatives are best for my family. And when our people leave our territories, they go to San Diego, they go to Maryland, they don't go to a different independent country. So for whatever historic reasons, we know that we have, our culture and our society has changed and morphed and been influenced, right? But if you're going to excite the local communities in our territories, in our colonies, to do something, and excite our elected leaders, we need to speak the language of politics in our local community, and to trigger these people that you said, rightfully said, we've all failed on. Our collective leadership, as my friend Joey Duenas used to say, you want to know who to blame? The list is long and distinguished, right? Yes. But if we're going to galvanize it, it's got to come from the people so that we run in front of them, the elected officials, and I'm looking for tactics, and a tactic like proposing mutual consent and having the Congress say, we don't want to give that to you, why should you? may be the kinds of things that galvanize our local
Yes.
community that says, that's not right,
Yes.
and it's time to do something different.
Definitely. And like I told you when we were eating today, we were meeting today, I'm very enthusiastic about that idea. But I think, and this is why Right to Democracy has the intention and sees this as an opportunity, this 250th anniversary, is that we are in a critical time. The mutual consent thing has not happened, not because we have not tried. Like the founders of our Constitution thought that it was an instrument of mutual consent, right? When it was brought back from Congress edited, the governor of Puerto Rico had to make a decision. I actually had a professor that was there that day that it came back. He got our governor, first elected governor, got so mad that he went like, ugh, and he went to his room and he was there for 24 hours without eating. And he came out and he said, okay, we have to do this. So they accepted that. You can say that in NMI, they really believe they have a mutual consent covenant. But as things are progressing and things happen with the environment, including those things in the environment, they're discovering it is not. Here in American Samoa, the deeds of cession are understood as a mutual consent agreement. But the deep sea mining has shown that it is not. And it is like Dr. Underwood said, all these instruments that were allowed by Congress really do not compromise other future Congress, because at the end they're just public law. They were approved by the US Congress. So in any case, we are in a conundrum. And so in Right to Democracy, like, how do we confront this? How do we reckon this? It has to be first by building a movement, and this is why all politics are local, but they cannot stay local. They have to be it has to be a conversation that is cross-territorial, because then we kind of lower the volume of all these myths and toxicity that divide us, so we can then also unite allies in the US. It is an opportunity, the 250th. Why? Because they are questioning their own democracy right now. Like, we have a moment when they're asking, what is the next 250 on the circumstances that we're living now? So if we are able to say, hey, we're here, it has been 125 years where we have been living what you are feeling now, because democracy itself is a concept that has never really materialized fully, not even for you. This insidiousness will continue until you reckon with it. And so how we can push for this reckoning, and in the meantime start talking between the territories what real self-determination would look like. Because it is not mutual consent until you have the chance, like Puerto Rico as a nation has the chance to decide whether or not I want to be in this relationship or not. Like, that has never been a question. Like Melvin said, when they did the doctrine of unincorporated territory, or the territorial incorporation doctrine, which was an invention, there's only two options. None of them was self-determination. It was either you are a territory to get integrated to the United States, or you are an incorporated or a non-incorporated, and you will stay like a colony until Congress decides. So the opportunity for self-determination has never really happened. And so that is why for us, it's like we need to start having conversations cross-territorially of what self-determination looks like for us, like what does it require, so we can push it at the same time we push our reckoning with different strategies in the US, with the responsibility to provide that real space for self-determination and respect our leaders in their efforts to do that. Thank you.
Buenas noches. Well, si Robert Naomi Celestial. Born and raised here in Guam. I think some of you know who I am. I'm an activist and an advocate. And I've been pushing for an issue that's very important to me and to the people of Guam for over 20 years. And I'm not sure if some of you haven't heard. But first of all, thank you for coming to our beautiful island. Thank you for advocating for what you do. I understand over the past 24 years, building relationships in the United States with other individuals who have the same passion and the same issues that affect what happened here in Guam. I'm talking about folks who were exposed to nuclear fallout, folks who worked in the uranium miners. The people of Guam were kept secret for many, many years. Even the people of Guam today don't even realize how we were impacted by the secrets that were kept for many, many years. I had to go to the National Academies of Science in 2004 to prove it, because over many, many years advocating for this, our people didn't even believe that they would do this to our people. And when the National Academies of Science came out with a report that says, yes, Guam did receive measurable fallout from the nuclear testing in the Pacific and was kept secret, and the people of Guam should be included in the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act as downwinders. I was able to work with Senator Hawley, Senator Lujan, Senator Crapo, Congresswoman Hernandez, and all these other great people, and got us into the Senate and got passed twice in the Senate to get Guam included with the other states like Utah, New Mexico, Idaho, and Missouri. And then the last minute, in July, the Senate decided to take Guam out and Idaho. And what they did was, Senator Crapo just made a phone call and said, hey, keep Idaho and Guam in. But then Senator Grassley, the chairman, said, just pick one, which evidently he picked Idaho because he's from Idaho and we didn't have representation in the Senate. And so that's why Guam was kept out. But we were eligible to receive the compensation, but we didn't have a voice in the Senate. We didn't even have a voice in the House, because even though there had an amendment to be introduced in the House rules, it was never heard. And so the issues is, to me, working for over 20 years with the senators, the congressmen and women in Congress, I think our main problem is our local leaders not standing up for the people of Guam. I'm talking about the delegate, the governor, and the legislature. Only a few legislators would support us. But everyone that, over the 24 years we've been pushing this, it is a shame that what our government leaders have done for the people of Guam. Because we deserve to be included in this program. And by the grace of God, Missouri, Senator Hawley got his state to be included, but they forgot about 2 zip codes in his state. And it's sad because that section that got excluded was Congressman Bill's area, and he happens to be a Democrat. So now Ohio wants to get into the program, and now we have another chance to get into the program because they're asking us to join Missouri and Ohio with a new bill. And the problem that we have is that our leaders don't care. And I'll be honest with you, they don't care. They have other issues that they want to take in priority to the health and the welfare of our people that are dying from cancer and other diseases. Missouri got either $50,000 or all their health benefits paid for. They either have to choose, either take $50,000 or all your expenses on your medical health be taken care of. They're accepting that. My friend from Idaho said all her folks there have already received their $100,000 for being downwind. We were supposed to receive that same thing. And here we are, because of what you guys are trying to do. A right for democracy, to unite. But where's our local leaders? How are they? You guys are speaking about mutual consent. How can you have mutual consent when you can't even get our local leaders to agree on anything? It's greed, power, and look at me. That's what it is. It's always been like that. I remember 24 years ago when I first started this issue, I go into a radio station. People call up and say, no, don't believe this guy. This guy's nuts. But then when the National Academies of Science came back and said, yes, it's true, you guys were poisoned. And even then, even today, our leaders don't even care. They say they care, but they don't. I have to go back to Washington, D.C. and lobby as a non-profit organization. And so I'm not sure how you're going to get all the territories together and speak as one, when even our local leaders can't even speak as one. And the delegates there in Washington, D.C., they don't even get along with each other. Matter of fact, I was interviewed with Senator Crapo on Channel 6 in the States. They interviewed me here in Guam when Guam got excluded. Senator Crapo, you could go online and find out exactly what he said. He said, Guam does not have a senator nor a congressman in Congress. We have to go and build a relationship with those that have the same issues we do. And I said, my God, here we are, 2025, and here's a senator who says that we don't have a senator and a congressman to help us here in Guam, while our cancers are no different than the cancers for those folks in the States. So,
Senor Masi, I want to give time for some people to respond. But Senor Masi,
okay.
but totally bedomine. Nita papaki se senor totally bedomine cars na. Okay, is there anyone on the panel that wants to speak to these issues?
I have a reaction.
Hungan? Or
Yes. I have a reaction.
or Senor Samoa, did you also want to respond? Or,
I'm gonna put her on the spotlight with this answer. Okay, so as I said, I went to do my doctorate in Spain on fundamental rights because I wanted to understand what he's saying about why do our local leaders don't do anything, right? In the sense of like what are the social factors here at play? And one of the things I found was this reading a book by Miguel Arriestra in my research for my dissertation about pobreza y colonialismo, so it's poverty and colonialism in Puerto Rico. And Miguel Arriestra really explains when you have a colonial power, the economy is an extractive one, and the relationship is dehumanizing, not only for the colonized, also for the colonizer, and also for a third actor, which is the local subject that administers that relationship. So that third party, that is this local subject that administers the relationship between the colonized and the colonizers, gets dehumanized because their very existence depends on that relationship, and many times they benefit from the spoils of that relationship. And so there is a dehumanizing of our own local governments in this relationship because it is an economic situation that is very extractive, and many of the decisions that are made many times do not represent, and it happens in Puerto Rico all the time too, does not represent the welfare of the people that, it's not done for the welfare that people that live there, right? They benefit status quo. And so, for me in Puerto Rico, I've seen this with administration after administration, and I see how the local people in Puerto Rico, instead of really looking whether the people they're electing really represent, because yes, it is a problem of our local leaders, but who elects our local leaders? The people, we do. And so there is also something happening then at a level of the people that are participating in this relationship of dependence. It's a relationship of dependence. It's a relationship of a lot of fear, of lack of education, of really just voting because my mom or my dad told me that this is the person that I have to vote with since I was little, because they are fanatized because of, in Puerto Rico is whether we're statehood or whether we're independent or whether we are pro-Commonwealth. It becomes like a mantra and it becomes fanatism. So the whole colonial relationships warps the capacity even of local leaders and of local people to make these critical assessments of their own actions. It dehumanizes people. And so for us, again, in Right to Democracy, is how can we transcend this dehumanization by coming together and start realizing how they are dividing us, how they are also, how we are, in spite of our differences, how we are all the same. And I feel that, and I've seen it even in our summits, when you have people that have different ideologies from the territories come, and like from Puerto Rico, I've seen it. People with different ideologies that would never had be in accord in Puerto Rico, they come and meet our Samoan friends and read their story and realize, wow, what have I been thinking of this only and not realize that this is something else, and boom, we are going to cooperate with each other, even within the territory. So there is this magic of this interaction that I really am hoping that will grow with the growth of this movement. And also there is another magic that is happening in American Samoa right now that is faced by a problem like deep seabed mining. Yes, Professor Underwood, their leaders are against it. But you know why their leaders are against it? Because the whole civil society united in a way that it had not done, Andra knows. This pressure that the local leaders received, governor and the resident commissioner received because of the deep sea mining, was what motivated them to adopt the position, to go against it. So there is this power in civil society, a civil society that is educated, a civil society that can transcend typical divisions in order to come together to pressure your local leaders, to actually pressure them, because without you, they will not exist. And that was something that we learned from the case of American Samoa.
Did you want to share a little bit? Did you want to, or no?
I can share a little bit, but
A little bit, and then we'll close.
So the fact that the divide and conquer and concept with, get each of us isolated, the U.S. territory, but the fact that we are now being stimulated and inspired. If the right to democracy didn't get Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, NMI, us to see, oh my goodness, look at how the other U.S. territories are reacting. They gathered almost 3,000 signatures to protest, and it seems like it was a stimulating vision that was coming from outside to at least build this movement of the young generation. The chief there, it's very challenging, but for my generation, looking at the younger generation coming up, I have to act. I have to be out there, because we're not going to be here for the next 40, 50 years. It's our children and grandchildren. But they saw how the movements of the connectivity of the U.S. territories came about. It was very, very powerful. And now the chiefs are beginning to see, oh my goodness, there's a wave. We need to react. And that's where the senators and representatives came out. And it was just like a tsunami right now for us. And that's where I believe, yes, it's very hard for our own local leaders, but when they see the impetus that's started by other U.S. territories, they say, we better act. We cannot be stagnant like this, because our children and our grandchildren are watching. There's no action coming from us. These are the senators and the chief talking to each other. So that's why I know we're beginning to also see, as Honorable Underwood knows, the federal, they are playing their games. But if we go ahead of understanding the law that they are breaking, we need to at least empower and spread this. Oh, you give us your law, you educated us, we are the victims, but now we are empowered because we have the knowledge and we're sharing this with our other brothers and sisters, and it's making us more determined and unity in strength. That is what I want to at least give to all of you. And I'm going back, and as a fellow, I am going to inspire the younger generation. So.
Si Diyos masi, to all of our panelists, si Diyos masi, para todos hamzu, pero if not the mitzu, what?
We can stick around.
We're already, or if you can, how are the panelists here? If you can ask very quickly, then yes.
Basically, and excuse my naivety in this world and in this country and in the way things are run, but it seems like there are different levels in the entire process that we're talking about, from the territories and the population and the voters, all the way up to the military, the federal government, the state, the president, the Congress, the judicial system. Each one of those points, each one of those levels are decision points. People make decisions. Individuals make decisions. And some of them are collective. At each of these levels, what are the things that most influence them? Here in Guam, with our leaders, it would be the voting population, the businesses, and all that stuff, right? And so for each of these levels, there are very distinctive factors that influence their decision. Money, land, personal relationships, biases, education, privileges, all that factors in. So when these decisions are made by a committee chairman, by Congress, by the president to the veto, or the judiciary for whatever is legal, whatever opinions they're going to be considering, what are the things that affect and influence their decision?
Well, that's let me sum up now, and I can answer a little bit of what you have asked there. And so, vigilance is required in all democracies, but if you are in a colonial space, you have to offer even more vigilance. Because if you are in a functioning democracy, then what that means is that your rights as a citizen, it's kind of, there's all these institutions in which your rights are supposed to be accounted for. Courts are supposed to take you seriously, represented leaders are supposed to take you seriously, elected leaders are supposed to sort of take your interests seriously. The power is spread out. You exist there. If you live in a colonial space, you have no guarantees. You have none of those guarantees, which means you have to be, and our panelists here have reminded us, whether they've been talking about deep sea mining, whether they have been talking about how the military can bypass their own environmental laws, whether they've been talking about how the United States can completely ignore its own fundamental principles. If you live in a colony, none of those guarantees apply. And so, ideally in a democracy, one person shouldn't be able to tell you whether you count or not, or whether you are a part of it or not. But if any of you have ever tried to order something on Amazon and somebody tells you they won't ship to you because you live in a territory, or if you ever have tried to join a federal program and they've told you, or a program in the States and they say, oh, you can't join because you're in the territories, but they could allow you to say, or if you have ever had anything like that where one person gets to decide, you don't count. And they might be a senator, a committee chair, a president, or they might just be somebody on the other end of a phone call. They might be, as Underwood said, somebody at the Department of Justice who knows nothing about Guam, but everybody says this is the territories guy. But you don't have any control over that. And the system is designed that you're not supposed to, because you exist in this fundamental imbalance where all of your rights are owned on that side. And so that's why in the colonies, vigilance, whether you're the leaders, whether you're the citizens, and so you cannot be lax, you cannot coast, you cannot skate. You have to be even more vigilant because they're not looking out for you. The system is designed, as Setlu Adi here reminded us, it's designed to take advantage of us. And so we can let it, or we can do what we should be doing, build up our democracy here, and remember that the democracy that we are connected to in the United States, the one that will be celebrating its 250th birthday next year, doesn't include us. If you want it to include us, there's a lot of work that has to be done. Doesn't include Guam, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, CNMI. Doesn't include them yet. And so vigilance is the name of the game. Take these issues seriously. Don't wait for Uncle Sam to take care of them for you. And so thank you again for everybody for,
I have
is it very quick?
very quick.
Okay.
Actually, I know that there's a lot of very profound complexity in the issues, but I wanted to say I believe that every problem has should have a multi-pronged approach. And I agree with someone, it might have been Simon, who said there seems to be a passivity in our community. And so this is the simple thing that I'm going to request. May I pass this leaflet? It's just to encourage people to invite family and friends to a No Kings vigil. It's a peace vigil, and all the information is here. And it's at the intersection on Saturday. We have joined, we've been doing this for months. I joined as a grandmother because I feel like we were very lucky growing up in Guam at the time that we did, despite the Vietnam Wars, despite the desert storms, that we had a pretty good life here. And I want my grandchildren to grow up with that. And I fear and I dread what's happening in the States. And I know that the writing is on the wall for Guam. So, but we've had very few people turn out, despite the fact that they're concerned too. They have multiple reasons for not coming. And so I'm asking your assistance to encourage people to come out to this. We will have the posters ready. We will have masks for you if you don't want to have your faces shown. But just come and support, because at the level of people power, we can at least give support to our leaders who are trying to make the changes.
Si Diyos masi, Senora. Hunggan, and please take a flyer from Senora there. And, all right, si Diyos masi no hamza todos, aday hamza gitsalan. Okay, makpo. Oh, there's sandwiches and cookies outside. Okay.
Let's try to get a picture. Yes.